The temperature in Chicago drops differently than anywhere else I've ever been. It doesn't settle gently like snowfall. It arrives like a wall, like something solid and intentional, pressing against your skin from every direction at once. Standing on the front porch of my childhood home at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in December, wearing nothing but a cardigan I had grabbed off the back of a dining chair, I understood for the first time in my 28 years why people describe cold as something that can reach inside you. Through the frosted glass panel beside the front door, I could see the warm amber glow of the living room. The Christmas tree my mother had decorated the weekend before was still lit, blinking slowly in that soft, rhythmic way that used to make me feel safe when I was small. I could see the shape of my brother moving through the room, unhurried, completely comfortable. I watched him pour himself a glass of water from the kitchen tap like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't standing 6 feet away from him on the other side of a locked door. My phone was at 8%. I didn't cry. I didn't pound on the door. I called my father. But before I tell you what my father found on my brother's laptop that changed absolutely everything, I want you to understand something about how I got here, because what happened to me that night didn't start at the dinner table. It started much earlier than that. It started the moment I was born second. The evening had begun the way most evenings at my parents' house begin, when I visit with tension disguised as warmth. My mother had cooked pot roast, which is the meal she makes when she wants the appearance of a good family dinner without the effort of actually building one. My brother was already there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen island with his feet up on the barstool rungs, scrolling through his phone, while my mother moved around him like he was a piece of furniture she had arranged the whole room to complement. He is 23 years old. He has not had a job in 14 months. He still sleeps in the bedroom with the band posters he put up at 17, and my mother washes his sheets every Sunday without being asked because, as she once told me, he has a sensitive immune system. I am a registered nurse. I work 12-hour shifts 3 days a week at Northwestern Memorial and spend the other 4 days studying for my nurse practitioner boards. I have paid my own rent since I was 22. I have never once asked my parents for money. I tell you all of this not to make myself sound superior, but to give you the landscape, because the landscape matters. Dinner was fine until it wasn't. My mother had left her purse on the console table in the hallway, which is where she always leaves it. She had mentioned earlier in the week that my grandmother had sent her a birthday card with cash inside, $500, which was generous and a little unusual and therefore memorable. At some point between the salad course and the pot roast, my mother went to the hallway for something, and when she came back, she was holding the envelope. Her face had already made its decision before she opened her mouth. She looked directly at me. The envelope was there, she said. The card was there. But the $500 was gone. I was in the middle of cutting a piece of bread. I set the knife down. I told her I hadn't touched her purse. I told her I hadn't been near the hallway. I told her calmly, clearly, without raising my voice, the way you learn to communicate when you work in emergency medicine and someone is telling you something that cannot possibly be accurate. My brother, without looking up from his phone, said he had seen me near the hallway when I first arrived. My mother's expression didn't shift. It didn't have to. It had already arrived at its destination. What happened next is something I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count, not because it surprised me but because it didn't. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people who grew up in families where the benefit of the doubt was distributed equally. My mother has never looked at my brother, and my brother has never looked at me with the same set of eyes. I have understood this since I was old enough to understand anything. But understanding a thing and feeling it land in your chest like a fist are two entirely different experiences. She told me to get out. Not to think about it, not to wait while she looked into it, not to give me 30 seconds to say another word. She pointed at the front door and told me to get out of her house. My brother finally looked up from his phone. He didn't look guilty. He looked fascinated, the way someone looks when they're watching something they expected to happen and are pleased to see confirmed. I picked up my cardigan. I didn't slam the door. I want you to understand that. I closed it behind me with exactly the same amount of force it takes to close a door normally, because slamming it would have given them something to say about me, and I refused to give them anything. The porch is not enclosed. The wind off Lake Michigan in December does not negotiate. Within 4 minutes, my fingers had gone from cold to numb, to something past numb, a strange buzzing absence that I recognized clinically as the first stage of peripheral vasoconstriction. I am a nurse. I knew exactly what was happening to my body and I could not stop it. I want to tell you about the moment I stopped being afraid. There is a thing that happens when you have grown up being the one who is always wrong in a family where wrongness is assigned before the evidence arrives. I spent years responding to it the way most people respond to injustice. With panic, with over-explanation, with an almost desperate need to prove your case fast enough that the verdict will change. I had argued, appealed, explained, justified, apologized for things I had not done, and cried in more bathroom stalls than I can count. And standing there on that porch, watching my breath form small clouds in the dark, I realized with a startling clarity that I was not doing any of those things. I was not pressing the doorbell. I was not calling through the window. I was not composing a text to my mother with bullet points of evidence in my favor. I was standing still, and the stillness was not defeat. It was something harder and quieter than defeat. Psychologists call it the withdrawal response to chronic invalidation. What it felt like was this: I had finally, completely, understood that nothing I said inside that house was going to matter. Not because the truth was unavailable, but because the truth was not what was being sought. My mother was not confused. She was not waiting for more information. She had made the only decision she had ever been willing to make, which was the one that kept my brother comfortable, and I was standing outside in the cold because comfort, in my family, had always been a resource allocated in one direction. When I understood that, the panic left. What replaced it was not peace exactly. It was precision. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. He had been at the garage, 2 miles away, working on a project he takes up every winter when the days get short and the house gets small. I told him where I was. I told him why. I did not cry. I told him I was at 8% battery and to please hurry. He said 2 words. He said, "I'm coming." I watched my battery tick to 6%. To 5. I counted the seconds the way I count seconds at work when I am waiting for a result that will determine what I do next. I watched the street. There was a light on in the neighbor's house across the road, a blue television light that flickered, and I focused on it the way you focus on a fixed point when you are trying not to lose your balance. Then I heard the engine. My father drives a truck that he has owned for 11 years and refuses to replace because, as he says, it still does what a truck is supposed to do. It is not a subtle vehicle. I heard it before I saw it, the deep, reliable sound of an engine that has never once left anyone stranded. He pulled up to the curb and was out of the truck before it had fully settled. He walked to me. He didn't run. He walked the way my father always walks when something is wrong, with this particular quality of deliberate movement that I have come to understand means he is controlling every variable except his direction. He took off his flannel-lined jacket and put it around my shoulders in a single motion that did not leave room for discussion. He looked at my hands. He looked at my face. He said nothing about the cold or the injustice or the fact that his wife had locked their daughter out of the house in December. He looked at the front door, and the expression on his face was not anger exactly. It was the expression of a man who has arrived at the end of his patience with something he had been patient about for a very long time. He said, "Stay close." He walked up the porch steps and he knocked twice, not tentatively but not aggressively either. The knock of someone who lives in the house and is observing the formality of knocking as a courtesy rather than a request. My mother opened the door because she recognized the knock and because she was not expecting what came through it. She started to speak. She said something about how she was handling it and he didn't have to come and this was a family matter. My father walked past her without stopping. Not rudely. Not dismissively. He simply had somewhere to be and she was not it. My brother was in the living room, back on the couch, the television on now, entirely relaxed, wearing the expression of someone who has successfully completed a task and is now at leisure. He looked up when my father came in. Something in his face adjusted slightly. Something that had been loose tightened. My father stood in the center of the living room. He did not raise his voice. He never raises his voice, which is a thing about him that used to confuse me when I was young and now I understand is the source of every authority he has ever held. He said, "Where is your laptop?" My brother said it was in his room. My father said to go get it. My brother glanced at my mother. My mother took a step forward and said that this was unnecessary and invasive and that the situation was already resolved, and my father repeated himself in the same tone, the same volume, the same cadence, as though he had all night and no intention of changing his request. My brother went to his room. He came back with the laptop. He held it in a way that suggested he was considering his options, and my father held out his hand, and after a pause that lasted just long enough to be its own kind of answer, my brother placed the laptop in it. My father opened it at the kitchen table. He did not invite commentary. My mother stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room making statements about privacy and overreaction that my father listened to with the attentiveness of someone who is genuinely occupied with something else. I stood near the back door, still wearing his jacket. I was warming up. My hands were starting to hurt, which is what hands do when the blood returns to them. He opened the browser history first. I don't know what he was looking for exactly. I think he was looking for the shape of something, the way an experienced person looks for patterns rather than specifics. He found it faster than I expected. A sports betting platform, visited 4 times in the past week. He opened the account. My brother had logged in through the browser and left himself signed in, the way you do when you believe no one will ever check. The transaction history was there. Clean, itemized, automatic. 3 days ago, a transfer from an external account. $520. The external account was labeled with a nickname my brother had assigned it himself. A nickname I can only describe as casual, the kind of label you give something you are not worried about hiding. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. My mother said it could be his own savings. She said it proved nothing. She said he had been putting money aside for months and there was no reason to assume the worst. My father looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man reviewing a longer history than the one currently on the table, and then he opened a second tab. He opened my brother's email. My brother made a sound that was not quite a word. My father didn't pause. The inbox was ordinary. But my father went to the sent folder, and the sent folder is where the story was. An email had been sent 9 days ago from my brother's account to someone I didn't recognize, a name I had never heard. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single screenshot. I watched my father look at it and I watched his jaw do something I have only seen it do twice in my life. Both times when something landed that he had not been prepared for. He turned the laptop to face the room. The screenshot was a text conversation. The name at the top of the conversation was mine. And the conversation was between my brother and someone he called Kev, and the most recent message, sent the night before last, read, "Watch this. Tomorrow she's going to come for dinner and I'm setting the whole thing up. Mom's already primed. The cash is the easy part. There was more, but I will tell you the part that I return to, the part that I think about when I try to understand the specific texture of cruelty that comes from inside a family." He had written, "She'll try to explain herself and Mom won't hear a word. She never does. I'll have the room to myself by 9. My mother's face did something complicated. She started to speak, and then she stopped, and then she started again, and nothing she said had the structure of an argument because there was no longer an argument available to construct. She said he was young. She said he was struggling. She said that what he had done was impulsive and that the money could be replaced and that the important thing was to understand where this behavior was coming from and address it with compassion. My father was not done. He had seen something when he was in the sent folder, and he went back to it now with the focused attention of someone who has been following a thread and has just reached a knot in it. He opened a second sent email, this one from 6 weeks ago. The recipient was the Graduate Admissions Office at Rush University's Nurse Practitioner program. I had applied to that program in September. I had interviewed in October. I had been waiting and waiting for a decision that I had told myself was simply taking longer than expected, the way these things sometimes do, and I had been managing my disappointment quietly in the way I manage most things quietly. My brother had accessed my email. He had done it through a shared family account we had both been added to years ago, one I had forgotten about and apparently he had not. He had gone into my personal email from that shared access point. He had found the acceptance letter. He had replied on my behalf and declined the offer. The email in his sent folder was his reply using my name, written in a register that sounded approximately but not quite like me, and the Rush University Admissions Office had responded with a brief acknowledgement. "Thank you for letting us know. We wish you well. I want to tell you about the moment I read those words because it is different from the moment with the locked door, different from the cold, different from the text messages. The locked door was something I had been bracing for my whole life without knowing I was bracing for it. But the email was something else. It was the discovery that a door I thought had never opened had in fact been opened, and then silently, deliberately, closed before I ever had the chance to walk through it. My father read it once. He read it a second time. The room was completely quiet. My brother was looking at the floor. My mother had stopped talking. My father closed the laptop carefully, the way you close something when you want your movements to be precise. He stood up. He looked at my brother for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had that quality I have been trying to describe, the quality of something that has been fully compressed. He said, "You didn't just steal from your mother to cover yourself. You went into your sister's life, found the thing she had worked for and removed it. Quietly. So she wouldn't know what happened. She would just think she hadn't been good enough." My brother said it wasn't like that. My brother said I was already doing fine and the program was competitive and I probably would have struggled, and he said a few other things that I won't repeat here because repeating them gives them a weight they don't deserve. I stepped forward. I hadn't said anything since I came back inside. I had been standing near the back door, warmer now, watching. And I stepped forward because there was something I needed to say, not for my brother's benefit, and not for my mother's, but because sometimes the truth requires a witness, and in that moment the only one available was myself. I said, "You weren't afraid I would struggle. You were afraid I would succeed. And you decided that my success was a threat you were allowed to remove." He didn't answer. That is its own kind of answer. My father made 2 phone calls that night. The first was to Rush University's admissions coordinator, whose number he found in the original acceptance email in my inbox. He left a message, explaining that a reply had been sent from my account without my knowledge and requesting that the offer be reinstated for review. The second call was to our family attorney, a woman who has handled my parents' estate planning for 15 years and who answered, despite the hour, with the patience of someone who has been handling things at inconvenient hours for a long time. She asked a few questions. My father answered them. She said she would need to review the documentation, but that what he had described constituted several things that could be addressed formally if the family chose to proceed. My mother chose to become very quiet at that point, which is what my mother does when the framework she has built around a situation begins to reveal its structure. She has spent 28 years constructing a version of our family in which my brother's failures were temporary and my own were permanent, in which his needs were urgent and mine were manageable, in which any resource, attention, grace, money, the benefit of the doubt should flow in his direction by default because he needed it more. She had built this so thoroughly that she had come to experience it as natural law. Standing in the kitchen at midnight, watching my father document her son's actions on a laptop, she was watching natural law get revised. My father didn't ask her to leave. He didn't make an ultimatum. He did something more lasting. He sat down at the kitchen table and he told my brother, calmly, specifically, and without the luxury of vagueness, exactly what the next steps would be. The money would be repaid in full, including the amount lost to the gambling platform. The admissions office would be contacted formally with documentation. There would be no more access to any shared accounts. And if one more thing was discovered, anything, in any direction, the conversation with the family attorney would move from advisory to active. My brother looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. There was nothing strategic about what happened next. My mother did not storm out. My brother did not leave dramatically. The night ended the way a long fever sometimes ends, not with a crisis but with a slow, unglamorous drop in temperature. My brother went to his room. My mother went to bed without saying goodnight to me, but also without saying anything else, which was its own specific kind of concession. My father and I sat at the kitchen table. He had made tea at some point without me noticing, and he pushed a mug toward me the way he used to push things toward me when I was small, and he wanted to communicate something he didn't have the words for. We sat there for a while. The Christmas tree was still blinking in the living room. The furnace clicked and hummed. He said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to see how bad it had gotten." I told him he was here now. I meant it. 3 weeks later, I received a formal email from the Rush University admissions office. They had reviewed my father's letter and the documentation he had provided. They had consulted with their admissions committee. They were pleased to inform me that, given the extraordinary circumstances, my acceptance to the nurse practitioner program was being reinstated for the upcoming cohort, and that they hoped to welcome me in the fall. I read the email twice at my kitchen table in my apartment, alone, with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Then I sat with it for a while, not because I needed time to process it, but because I wanted to feel the full weight of it before I moved on. There are moments that deserve to be experienced completely before you file them away, and that was one of them. My brother repaid the money. Not enthusiastically and not quickly, but he repaid it. He is, as of this telling, enrolled in an outpatient program for the gambling issue that preceded all of this and that, I learned later, had been going on for nearly 2 years without my mother knowing or choosing to know. I don't say this to excuse what he did. I say it because the full picture is always more complicated than the story you can fit into a single night, and I have spent enough time in hospital corridors to know that people who cause harm are rarely doing so from a position of wholeness. I don't have the kind of relationship with my mother now that I once wanted to have with her. That is something I am still making peace with. I know that she loves me in whatever way she is capable of loving me, and I know that this capacity was shaped by things that happened to her long before I arrived and that she has never addressed or examined. Understanding this does not erase what happened on the porch in December. It simply adds context to a picture that has always been larger than any single frame. What I think about most, though, is not my brother's choices or my mother's blindness or even the cold on the porch. What I think about is the moment my father stepped out of his truck and walked toward me in the dark, unhurried, with his jacket already half off his shoulders. I think about how that single motion communicated something that 28 years of wanting to be believed had not been able to give me. He didn't need me to explain. He didn't need me to prove anything. He looked at his daughter standing in the cold and he made a decision. And the decision was simple and irrevocable, and it said, "You are worth the drive." There is a thing that happens in families where one child is given the benefit of the doubt consistently and the other is not. The child who is not given it begins to wonder, quietly and then less quietly, whether the absence of doubt is something they have earned or something they were assigned before they were old enough to earn anything. I spent a long time wondering about that. I don't spend as much time on it now. Rush starts in September. I have already picked out my white coat. They thought they could define my ceiling by removing my floor. But the thing about taking something from someone quietly, hoping they'll never find out, is that it only works if no one is paying attention. My father was paying attention. And now finally, so am I.